Let's call it 7 o'clock. Looks like 7 to everybody.
Good.
Yeah.
Close.
I'll call the meeting to order. So where are we? Do we have Rich Napolitano is no longer a member because he didn't run in the last election, and I think it takes effect as of the election date, the new slate of members, correct?
I believe they're sworn in on the 29th of November, so he's still in.
It's still on.
Yeah, still on
Till
through
December,
the end, till December, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so no changes, no new members to introduce. Let's see, alternates. We don't have any, do we, nobody's an alternate here.
No.
Okay, so none to see. The minutes of October, any changes to the agenda, John?
No changes.
Okay, the minutes of October 10, 2023. I make a motion, we accept them as presented. The second motion. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Any abstentions? None. Unanimous. Audience of citizens, anything anyone would like to bring up to us that isn't already on the agenda? Okay. No.
Excuse me, Mr. Nassif. This is Mike McGaldy, 33 Golden Road. Can you repeat that last statement you made about the audience of citizens?
I asked if anyone wanted to speak up and I didn't hear anybody, so I moved past it, but you're welcome to speak.
Okay, is this related, did you say it was related to things that are currently on the agenda for tonight?
I said anything that isn't already on the agenda.
That is not all right. Okay, thank
But if you
you.
have anything in general you want to bring up, please do. We're here.
Thank you.
That's that days. Who goes about that?
Apparently.
Which would.
Still. Okay. Mr. McGaldy, would you like to speak?
So I did have a question on the agenda where you guys, one of the items you have there is around minor modifications to special permit. And my question would be, when you get to that conversation later this evening, is there an opportunity, because I think you're going to engage, if I understand correctly, in discussion about that. So I wasn't sure if I'd have an opportunity to ask any questions when you get to that topic.
We don't usually interact with the public on typical business,
Okay.
but we're pretty open about the process. I'd encourage you to put any questions forth. But when we're considering regulation reviews, we don't typically have a discussion that involves the public. You're welcome to listen to it. If you have questions or want to formulate them, and if you have any questions about it, why don't you bring them up now? If you've reviewed the materials.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, my questions, I think, are really related to the definition of what a minor modification would mean, what that would look like, and, you know, some potential examples of what you guys as a committee might consider to be minor versus something that would require more formal process.
That's a really good question, but it's probably premature in that that's a question that I think we're going to be defining. We're trying to open up the development process to make it have less overhead for people applying for projects within Columbia. If that helps you with that, but in terms of what's minor, that's going to be something we discuss. I don't know that we could define that now.
Okay. All right. Thank
Okay.
you.
Yeah, and you know, there's a process, and if we propose any changes to any regulations, there's going to be a public hearing on it, and that's when the public would generally weigh in. And you're free to look at our minutes and send us a letter, but typically the methodology of conducting a meeting doesn't involve the public being able to participate in everything that we discuss. It just
Okay.
it would create a situation that probably wouldn't lead us to a resolution as quickly or as efficiently, but we're open to whatever input you have. So I would encourage you to follow our progress. Our minutes are posted online. Look at what the minutes state about it. You can obviously listen to what's going on in the meetings. And then during the audience of citizens, if you want to say something, you know, the only time we couldn't really consider something, an audience of citizens in any real depth, is if we had something that was in a public hearing mode, then we have to be very, very careful to take any testimony in a very designated, format during the public hearing.
Okay.
Okay?
Thank you very much. Yes, thank you. I appreciate the explanation.
Any suggestions or thoughts? We're wide open to it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Under unfinished business, John, nothing?
I don't believe we have anything
Okay.
under unfinished, no.
Okay, next up under new business is we have the 2024 Planning and Zoning Commission meeting schedule. And I'm gonna go to that. And, typically, we end up with some modifications because we find a conflict later in the year with something else, but this was thought through. And we want to talk about the annual report. Does everyone see this in your packet?
Yeah.
This makes sense to everyone? I haven't, fact checked it date by date by date. But these are the second and fourth
Right.
Mondays of each month, unless they conflict with a known holiday.
Correct.
Okay. So I'll make the motion that we accept this as our proposed schedule for next year, or as our schedule for next year.
I'll second the motion.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Unanimous? Yes. Okay. Thank you. Regulation revisions, John.
So there's just a number of things that we're still in process of reviewing that were discussed, sort of brought up by the regulations committee. And we can go through where we are with those. I think many of them are in the packet, and I can share the screen if you would like to sort of follow along with where we are. But it's really up to the commission on where we would like to proceed on these things. And I would also sort of follow the lead of Justin and the regulations committee on how you would like to discuss these and proceed with them.
Yeah, I think so from last meeting, the minor modifications of through special permits, we talked about in depth, the site plan versus special permit, and we went through the list. I feel like we talked a lot about those last meeting, and John, we met about those as well. Hopefully we can move on to the next step with whatever input we've got from the greater commission. We did not in depth talk about section 3, which I can give an overview on if you'd like. I think that's the only missing piece other than something new that's come up with the planned neighborhood housing, which we've had a couple discussions about. So Rick, if you'd like, I can talk about section 3 and.
Yes, I would appreciate that.
Okay, so this is in the packet in the next section after the dates for 2024. The idea behind this, and this is something that we met on several occasions about with the subcommittee, is the really what it does in essence is it creates a category of structure, 2 categories of structures. One is regulated, one is unregulated. And let me give you a little bit of background why, and I'll speak for myself, you guys chime in as well, why we feel this is important. The first thing is that the definitions around structures and what needs a zoning permit is kind of simultaneously overbroad and very specific, if that's even possible. So in one sense, there is no limiting factor to what a structure is within our current regulations. So if you're a layperson and you're looking through our website and you're going to put up a structure, whatever that structure might be, and you look at building permits, well, there's a 200 square foot minimum for building permits. You go to Eastern Highlands, if you need a Eastern Highlands permit, there's a 200 square foot minimum for an Eastern Highlands permit. And then you get to the third category permits, which is zoning, and there's no minimum requirement for that, which creates a lot of confusion. at the very least. So one of the things the other thing that is part of this is the very specific piece, which is we were regulating things like under the structure definition, handicap ramps, towers, bay windows. I mean, some things that were not necessarily appropriate to lump into this category that would require a zoning permit, but wouldn't really require any other permitting process. So the essence of the next couple of pages, if you were to look through here, is the first thing is that it defines a building or regulated structure. The numbers that we used for the regulated structures for a certificate of zoning compliance is 200 square feet or more. Unregulated structures may in some cases require a permit, and that would also have to be reviewed by the zoning enforcement officer. So it's not anything under 200 square foot is a get out of jail free card. In some cases, if you're running electricity, if there's other things involved, obviously you have to have some sort of permitting process. But it limits the regulatory burden a little bit, makes it more clear. Some of this is just basic stuff, type of application, plot plan, certificate of zoning compliance. And really the definitional changes within there are regulated versus unregulated. The second page of it, when we talk specifically about regulated structures, it's anything constructed or erected, the use of which requires location on the ground or attachment to something having location on the ground. As used in these regulations, structures shall include but not limit to buildings, swimming pools, fences, or walls greater than 6 feet in height, permanently placed outdoor storage containers, above ground storage tanks in excess of 250 gallons, and other significant buildings or building additions in excess of 200 square feet. So it narrows down the definition, gives you some minimum standards so it's easy to understand, and also removes some of the things like handicap ramps, bay windows, things like that, which really probably in essence just cluttered up the definition. There was some concern that Connie brought to us about within the Columbia Lake Protection Overlay Zone to, determine runoff and phosphorus issues. So this has been added by John as well. So in the Columbia Lake Protection Area Overlay Zone, new unroofed terraces, patios, or similar hardscapes, semi-impervious and impervious surfaces greater than 100 square feet or modifications, etc., would require a certificate of zoning compliance as well, so that those pieces can be calculated. And then unregulated structures, the definition of that is pretty straightforward: small accessory, or I always screw up this word, appurtenant structures or structural elements that are not for human or animal occupancy with a footprint of less than 200 square feet and do not require a building permit. Unregulated structures shall be exempt from all zoning permitting requirements. So the idea is to give people more flexibility. I think the biggest thing that this does is it gives more clarity on what needs permitting, zoning permitting in the first place, so that people aren't having to guess and have excessive calls into the building department and land use department. And it gives people a little more flexibility to do things with their own property when it comes to reasonable activities. So Walt and Rick, I don't know if you have anything to add to that. That's my 30,000 foot view of the change.
Well, I had some good things to say about it. Do you want to go first?
No, go ahead.
Okay, John, so one thing when we met about these as a subcommittee, one of the things that Justin and I probably don't have the same perspective on, and I'm really careful about the way I pick my words. I have a lot of respect for his perspective on this, and I know what he says comes from a deeply principled perspective, but I have concerns about the exact verbiage here. And that is, it allows for 0 setback from lot lines for structures. And I vehemently don't agree that that's a viable thing, especially in a non-conforming lot areas, but in all lots in general. Do I think we should come up with something that works for larger lots where there's no structures within 500 or 1,000 feet of a lot line? Maybe, but clearly this would create more problems amongst neighbors if we eliminated side yard setbacks for structures. Also, the number of structures. theoretically, based on this, you could put 12 20-foot long structures in a row, 10 by 20-foot structures, and erect a 200-foot solid wall on your property boundary. So a lack of a limit on the number of structures that can do this, you could create a large amount of impervious surfaces. And in the lake overlay zone, there is a limitation of 100 square feet. I think that should be expanded, especially if you provide compensatory storage for whatever structure you put. So I think, well, concerns under the current regulation are, I don't see unlimited structures on a lot line going down, you know, 1,000-foot lot line as being even remotely viable in any neighborhood, let alone substantially non-conforming neighborhoods around the lake. So I have a concern about. What I don't think this also addresses is we really need a little bit larger shed ordinance in town. The 10 by 12 foot or 120 square foot shed, that's not even the standard for most sheds anymore. It's 12 by 16 in that neighborhood, closer to 200 square feet, hence the 200 square feet that other towns use. But I think and I'd like to exempt sheds even in the lake overlay watershed zone from having to do a nutrient allocation plan if they can provide compensatory storage under the shed with crushed stone or something, or other structures like that, and make it simple that there's no negative impact on the lot. So you don't have to go through this study of the whole lot. So it makes it easier for people who want to put a gazebo out or a storage shed out, that they can do that. So the lack of a side yard setback, that Justin and I don't agree on that. Respectfully, I don't. You know, I think we need some setbacks, and I think having a reduced setback for a smaller structure like a shed, like we currently do in our regulations, is advisable. I think half of the normal setback for a shed up to 200 square feet would be a reasonable thing to start as a discussion point. Exempting in the lake overlay protection zone sheds or other structures which have compensatory storage and can channel that storage into the compensatory area under the shed via enough scientifically proven volume of crushed stone, so you don't need to do a nutrient allocation for the whole lot. The limitation on the number of those, maybe per acre or per lot or something like that, would be an advisable approach. So that if you have a half acre lot, you can't put 8 sheds on your lot. You can put 1 or 2 or whatever that might be, or maybe two exempted structures from zoning regulations, except for the side yard setbacks. I just don't see putting structures on a lot line, especially in areas that are smaller, even remotely works for the confines around the lake area. And then creating multiple structures able to run down a long lot line between neighbors right on the lot line, that's not something I would be in favor of supporting. So I'd like to, that's my 2 cents on this. I'd like to eliminate some of the overhead and expand what people can do with their land a bit, but to completely get rid of side yard setbacks, on those structures, I'm not in favor of that.
Yeah, and you and I will disagree on that. Well, I'd like to hear what you have to say, and I'll respond to a couple.
I totally agree that we have to go in that direction. I'm not sure 0 side yard. Yeah, I think without regulation, without zoning permit, it invites trespass. You can't physically set a shed or a structure on a property line without imposing on the neighbor. You can't physically do it. Whether it's the overhang of the building or the actual physical placement of it, it invites trespass. And I think that without the survey that's involved in the zoning permit, I think you will have cases of trespass that you didn't expect to have. The other thing is Connie, on a related matter, talked to us about how she spends a lot of time on sheds and, small projects in the lake area. She may be able to tell us what the dominant size is. You were saying that, 120 square feet isn't realistic anymore. Is it the 10 by 16? That's the dominant one. What is it?
Well, I think the dominant one is 10 by 12 because that's what we
That's
allow.
20 square feet.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
Exactly.
the one you see most is 12 by 24, so. Typically,
That's a garage. Yeah.
okay. Yeah, so that's half shed.
If we can accomplish that scientifically in a way that's acceptable from a lake health standpoint in the overlay zones, and then it becomes an aesthetic, is that a reasonable structure to allow half, I'm suggesting that I'm in favor of half of the normal setbacks on a smaller structure. But if you get a 24-foot long structure, that just is, that to me, yeah.
Shed, it's a building.
Yeah, it's no longer a shed, it's a garage, it's a building.
Okay. Can I ask, Justin, what was your thinking of, passes on why no, side yard setback?
Because it negates any reasonable change that you could make. So if we say that there's going to be an unregulated definition of or an unregulated category of structure, to me, maybe I'm looking at it too much of a black and white issue, but it's either unregulated or it's not. So if we go halfway regulated, halfway unregulated, where we say you have more flexibility with what you do, but we're still gonna require setbacks, that still requires a permitting process. Outside of a building permit, you wouldn't need a building permit. You don't need a Highlands Health District. You can put a fence up all the way down the property line. The trespass issue, I think I would, here's the way that I look at it. I don't disagree with you that could happen. Is it likely to happen? No one's gonna force anyone to put anything on the property line. It just gives the flexibility of the people to put things up closer to their property line.
It's more if you have the ability to,
Huh?
and it's more if you have the ability to. Sure. And the fact that you have the ability to, and it's unpermitted, unregulated. So you go to a shed, you go to Cloder, excuse me,
There's no control.
you go to the Cloder Farms, you buy your shed, you tell them this is where I want it, and the nearest guy who owns the property next to you, the nearest his house is, in my circumstance, might be a quarter of a mile away. And next thing I know, there's a shed, and I have two right now that are trespassed on my property. Because neighbors put their sheds without permits,
But how could they do that? They're required to get a permit and abide by 25-foot setbacks.
but they do.
But they do.
Now,
Oh, exactly, that's my point.
You put it in writing, and if you don't require it, then even the ones that are willing to go and find out and willing to put it in the right spot won't think they have to.
Did they, so I
I
don't,
think zero side yard is risky business.
One of the things is if you put the building on the setback, what do you put on your property line? What do you put on your property line? The wall, the roof overhang, the gravel bed that usually extends 12 or 18 inches beyond the footprint of the building?
Right.
What are you putting on the
that,
property?
that can be defined. That
Well,
nothing can go beyond, that nothing, whether it's an overhang or any envelope of the structure can go beyond the property line. That's just,
The other thing that's not addressed here is the front yard and rear yard. That means I can put something right on my property line in front.
it's not addressed now.
No,
That's what it's saying.
that's what it's saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that hasn't changed. We didn't modify that. So that could be an issue that in the existing regulations is a possibility because it may not.
Yeah, but then you're in the regulation.
What's that?
Then, yeah, but if you do that, aren't you going back and regulating?
Yeah,
something?
that's my point. That's why I'm pushing back, is because if we require setbacks, if we have these concerns, first off, we should take into consideration the possibility of something occurring. Okay, so I understand, and this is something that we talked in depth about multiple structures on one piece of property. We have a percentage of coverage percentages already within the regulations, something like 10%. Now that 10% may not be adequate. If we were to loosen up on the regulations, maybe we would want to change that. But those things are already regulated, and to limit it to a number of unregulated structures versus sticking with what's working now or what's in the regulations now, which is a lot coverage percentage. One of those two things has to change. You know what I mean? Because we're doubling up on these regulations.
But the unregulated, what it says here is unregulated structure shall be exempt from all zoning permitting requirements. So the lot coverage doesn't come into effect.
That's true. So that could be
None of
something.
it comes into effect. So that means I could put 20 structures up. As long as they're less than 200 square feet.
Yeah, I guess you're right.
Yeah, it just,
So I think it's I think by trying to broaden it and trying to make it all inclusive or all acceptable, we're contradicting a lot of the regulations that we already have.
I think that could be addressed with verbiage though within the regulation.
Well, so
I'd be in favor of expanding, our definition for sheds that allow for reduced setbacks growing to 200 square feet. I think that's reasonable and prudent. I think half of the side yard setback or rear yard, but not allowing a shed in the front yard. I mean, do you want to drive down the street and see shed?
You can drive down the road and see.
And what are you gonna define as the front?
The
Mr.
front
Chair?
is of road frontage. It always has been, that's our legal definition.
Yes,
You know, people can call them other things, but that's what we legally define.
John, that is.
John, I'm sorry.
yeah, no, if I could, I don't want to interfere with the commission's discussion, but I just wanted to make a couple of notes
You
here.
Participate.
So part of the reason that this was undertaken in the first place was there's sort of a shed question, which I think is an important one that you guys are getting into. But part of the reason that this nuanced definition was proposed is because there is a number of very minor appurtenant improvements that people make to their property. And we're thinking of things like, small propane tanks, small, air conditioning condensers, maybe, one of the mini split vent things that gets sort of bolted to the side of a house, or a bay window, some of these minor things that I think under many circumstances could just be a straight building permit, because that's all you would need, because it's a small minor improvement that is sort of associated with the envelope of the house, but is technically expanding, the footprint of the house, or expanding the structure of the house that currently gets wrapped up in the requirement for a zoning permit, which I think a number of people have sort of bemoaned that fact, and the land use office, specifically the building official and building clerk, have sort of bemoaned that a small air conditioning unit condenser requires a separate zoning permit, when it really should just be, I think one way of thinking is just a building sign off, essentially. And so the idea is to streamline that process for these very minor improvements that really do not affect property line issues, do not affect coverage issues, do not affect, what sort of traditional zoning, public health and safety issues. So there's a separate category there that I think there's an opportunity to.
I don't think there's any disagreement on the commission's part about the idea that we want to make it much simpler. I had my own issues on my own home where I needed to approach a zoning permit to put a mini split compressor that was bolted to the outside wall of my house. And that's one of the things that catalyzed that we need to take a more realistic view of the regulations.
And so the question is, so how, this was an attempt, maybe not the first attempt, or maybe the second attempt, to try to draw a line there of where do you say an improvement that changes the exterior of a house or adds some element to a structure, a regulated structure. At what point does that, need to or no longer need to trigger a separate zoning review? And so I think Justin is presenting one place to draw that line. Obviously, there's some pushback of that line should be somewhere else, but that's sort of the exercise here.
I think we can define what we don't feel is a substantial change to a structure. an existing living structure or a structure in general, are those, the compressors that are attached to the building or on the ground in the immediate proximity, we could say within 2 feet or 3 feet of the house footprint, propane tanks, generators,
handicap ramps.
yeah, handicap ramps, things like that. Those are things that I think we can really well define. I think the big thing that caused a discussion here is the potential for unlimited numbers of sheds. And then also unlimited numbers of sheds, especially if there was a 0 lot line, no setback from the either side or rear setbacks. And certainly we wouldn't want to see the sheds in front yards in general, but I think allow some sort of approach to opening our mind about what could be allowed there. We certainly want to make it simpler, and one of the things would be make it simpler to take those structures that you might add on a parcel, especially if it's a less than a certain size parcel, let them do it with compensatory storage so that it's more simple without having to do a whole site plan, a survey or anything. But to allow unlimited numbers of sheds or other structures on with that I'm not in favor of, and then certainly no side yard or rear yard setbacks, and certainly not in the front yard. That's something I'm not in favor of in any way whatsoever.
Then there's no limiting factor to anything. Because right now, the regulations as they stand with what's a regulated structure, which is everything, has no limiting factor.
But I think we already talked through that. We know that there's a lot of structures we don't feel feel a need to regulate from a zoning standpoint, other than to say that maybe there's some minor considerations and let them be approved by permit. I think the big question here is the sheds and pergolas and not pergolas, gazebos and things like that. I think that's the thing that we're not agreeing on. The rest of them, I think we're of the same perspective. Am I misstating that? I mean, so to say that you can go with an unlimited number of sheds on the lot lines, but that's not what I would like to see.
And I'm the only one here on this side of the.
I don't think you will.
No, I am with this, and I don't want to sound frustrated. But I also want us to think about operating within a reasonable realm of possibility. Has there ever been an instance where someone has put up unlimited small structures on their property?
We haven't allowed it.
You can't do it. You can't do it legally.
The type of person who would do that in general would do it with or without the regulation.
Not necessarily.
No, not necessarily, anything's possible.
Well, that's possible, but the reason we don't have a proliferation of these things is because we don't allow them.
People don't understand the regulations. They don't know, see, this is the nexus of the whole thing, is it's confusing to begin with. It's not like, we're very sophisticated, we take this for granted. We do this a lot, we read the regulations, I still learn this stuff every day, I'm kind of the newer guy, right? Most people don't understand this, that there are 3 permitting processes. That if you're going to put a structure, I know we're stuck on the structure piece, but it's an important piece. The other stuff we really not comfortable with. If I want to build a shed or a shed or whatever on my property, what am I going to be concerned with as a building person? Do I need a building permit? I go onto the town website. It clearly states building permit 200 square feet or less. Don't have to worry about it. Most people will look at that and don't even understand that there's a whole nother zoning permitting process. My point with that is that if those problems were a real possibility, we would be seeing them all the time now. Because of how people understand it.
No, I don't agree in any manner.
And we can disagree with that, but I think that's.
Well,
But
okay.
just because somebody doesn't do their homework is not the reason to eliminate certain zoning requirements.
But that's not my reasoning. I'm countering what you guys are saying with, if this were to take place and we changed it as it's written, there would be chaos and unregulated
It's
structures.
not gonna guess, if
There
you're
isn't
one
that
person,
now.
if be one person, my next door neighbor puts up 3 sheds on the property. line. That's gonna really.
But I think-
irritate me.
Okay. Well, that's another discussion, but for the purposes of this discussion, if that is a concern, my question is, can we balance that? Is there a regulatory solution or a language solution that could say if there is, and I understand, Bob, your point, if it's unregulated, then it's unregulated across the board. But there could, John, is there a balance that could be struck in your experience where if there is a concern of multiple unregulated structures that someone attempts to put up, could we reasonably regulate that and still give people the freedom to do reasonable things on their property with structures?
Yeah, I mean, but I think, I mean, the answer is yes, we could figure out essentially, if you're dividing property, you get a free split, and after that it's subdivision. There could be a sort of a first
Yeah.
shed, but when it becomes a little bit tricky when you say, okay, well, we're not regulating the first one, but then we're regulating the second one, because then to a certain extent, there needs to be some tracking of the first one, which if it's unregulated, we wouldn't necessarily have record of. So it's a little bit tricky, but yeah, you could do it with lot coverage. And I also just wanted to point out, as someone had mentioned, unregulated structures shall be exempt from all zoning permitting requirements. That does not mean all zoning requirements. Zoning permitting requirements is different. That's the paperwork. Zoning requirements would include things like coverage and height, and not plopping it right in the middle of your septic system or something like that. So permitting requirements is different from regulatory requirements. And so
John, if you don't have to get a permit for those structures,
Right.
how are you gonna track it then? Who's to prevent somebody from putting it on top of their septic system?
that's the question. I mean, and
That's another reason that there should be a permit process for these things.
If someone built a structure on top of their septic system, is there state regulation or law against preventing that?
well, I mean, any change of use should in theory require a B100A from the health district. And they I think don't do a formal sign off of things under 100 or less square feet, but I think they'd like to see them. But yeah, it's if you wanted to put your, it's a question of, okay, if you wanted to put your fire pit, like a portable fire pit, and you plop it right there, that what happens to be right on top of your septic tank, or to the left of your septic tank, who reviews it, who sees it? Probably nobody. And
But John, excuse me, John, but if we say unregulated structures include 200 square foot sheds, that means I can put it basically anywhere I want.
Yeah.
That's what we're saying, right?
Yeah.
That's what we're proposing. Yeah?
that's
Which
what's on
means
the table.
It could go on top of my septic system, it could go on the property line.
Let's get off the property line discussion for a second. I want to, John, and if you don't know this, or I'm asking an unfair question, just let me know. If I build a 199 square foot shed and I put it on my septic system, I put it on top of my well, is that not allowed by any agency, state agency, health district? Is anyone going to want to regulate that or have the ability to regulate it now?
I think the health district may have something to say about it.
Yeah.
And I can't cite you chapter and verse of the public health code, but I think there might be at least the latitude to require some sort of offset of a well or septic system for a structure of under 200 square feet. It's usually not a big deal, and it's usually a super quick check off, but I believe public health code has that regulatory or review authority.
Next, I'd like to circle back to just a couple items. So I think we're in agreement about those appendages to structures, like the compressors and the tanks, all those. We really need to address those and make them dead simple for people to move forward and install those without us interfering or without it impacting them negatively. the idea of other structures, in a perfect world, this is my view of it, and maybe this would be a better starting point, maybe not. I reduce side yard setbacks for very small structures in relation to homes, so, yeah, and maybe it's reduced side yard and rear yard setback, doing nothing to encourage these structures to be in a front yard, meaning the street side of a property.
Which you already have a relaxed setback for pre-existing non-conforming lots. So in you know, around the lake where lots are less than, you know, 50 or 60,000 square feet, there already is a provision in your regulation to relax setbacks.
Correct.
That could just be promulgated throughout the entire town on you know, on small structures.
And so that might be a simple way to call them unregulated, maybe a level of near zero regulation, but is owner certification of the location of non-permanent structures. I'm assuming most sheds are not with poured concrete footings and foundations, but maybe that's an assumption I shouldn't make.
No, but
Does
I
the
mean, if
building-
they're there for more than 6 months straight, they're considered a permanent structure.
Does the building department require hold downs for those structures?
They
You know
do not
that?
regulate, anything under 200 square feet.
Oh, okay. Sometimes
Um,
require hold downs.
right, so the other thing I would, I'm sorry,
Okay.
Mr.
So
So the other
let
thing
me
I
just-
wouldn't, okay, go ahead.
Let me just express, so expanding our shed regulation to allow slightly larger sheds up to 200 square feet. That would still allow for the reduced setbacks as we do with our current up to 120 square foot sheds. Exempting those from the nutrient allocation analysis if they provide compensatory offset of the roof runoff with gravel or whatever they would have below there. So we don't create a whole lot need for analysis, an analysis of an entire lot. And going up to 2 sheds or something like that, I think that would be a prudent next step for us. And then we can maybe refine it. Maybe the second shed doesn't allow for reduced setbacks. And if it is in a non-conforming lot, then it could either be the shed setbacks or the general lot allowed setbacks for that category of lot, whichever is less. And so then the smaller lots, it's a reduced setback still, but there's still required setbacks, but not require a formalized zoning permit, maybe just an affidavit from the owner that they've installed it in accordance with the regulations that we have for where they can be placed.
For the reduced setbacks, 15 feet? Do we know?
Goes down to 15 feet based on lot coverage. There's a chart for that. So we did create, where normally to go down to 15-foot setbacks, you had to have a special permit. We did create scenarios where you could have reduced setbacks, where you have those very small lots, so that people didn't have to go get special permits. And the zoning board of appeals will tell you their volume was down a substantial percentage, the number of applications, because our regulations really created a relief from having to do a special permit in a lot of cases. I don't think we've been hurt by it.
The
So
other,
if we were, oh, sorry, John, go ahead. No, good, John, go ahead.
so I just wanted to jump in and just note that the same questions that some members had about, well, how do we know how many sheds that someone's going to put on the property, or how do we know where they are, is still a sort of a question to be worked through, even if what we're doing is limiting the let's say, you know, your HVAC condenser or your mini split unit or your propane tank, in terms of placement. You know, you're still you could draw, like, I don't know, a 5 to 10 foot envelope extending out from the walls of the existing structure, existing house, let's say. And if you exempt somebody from putting, let's say, a ground mounted HVAC condenser, right? Somebody still has to look at some kind of site plan to say, yes, this is within that 5 foot, you know, buffer zone of the house, to know that it's, you know, if it's 5, it's okay. If they're putting it 10 feet, like let's say, you know, a propane tank, maybe someone wants to put a propane tank closer to their neighbors than to their own house. Someone still has to look at a site plan and do that measurement or do that verification. That, I mean, that could be as simple as you're asking essentially the building department to just do that, or perhaps a very simple sign off of the zoning officer without requiring a separate application. But there's still some kind of, even if you're exempting something, there is still some kind of verification that, yes, this improvement is in the exempt category, not in the regulated category. So there, you're not going to avoid regulatory review entirely. And so we just have to figure out what that process is, regardless of where you draw that line. Okay, anyway, I'll shut up for now. Justin.
No, that's okay. As far as, let's just make an assumption. I know that there's disagreement on some of the specifics within the regulation, but as far as next steps, John, obviously we'll have to have a public hearing on the matter before anything changes.
I think we need to refine what we propose for the public hearing.
My view, again, single guy out here, my view would be not to change it and to allow the public to weigh in through a public hearing process. I don't think it's substantially, even with everyone's concerns, if we were to go in that direction fully, I don't really see a substantial change within what we proposed
I
here.
don't think we can do that. I think we need to get everything in order the way we want it, then present it to the public. Because we can't make substantial changes at the public hearing. If we are proposing something to the public, they weigh in on it. But then we vote on
As
it
written.
as written. We can't, it's not an ongoing changing procedure.
We can make the changes less expansive, but to dramatically change what we propose at in a vote after a public hearing, that just defeats the purpose of the public hearing. People have to know what we're proposing. So in this case, I would make let's just say that maybe unrelated structures would be anything within 10 feet of an existing dwelling that are a propane tank up to 250 gallons, an HVAC compressor or mini split, a compressor that
Just a generator.
or generator, or we can think of anything else that's within 10 feet of the perimeter of an existing structure, but still on that lot, because we don't want it to be able to be put on an adjacent lot. And there are some structures that go very close to lot lines. I think we can come up with verbiage that really well defines that and makes it simple. And it could be in essence unregulated. Maybe just have a form to fill out that documents it that goes into the building file, but there's no permitting process and formal review, just a requirement that the owner stipulates where this change is being made to the property. And yeah, there's going to be no check on that. But I think I'm okay with that, especially if it's within 10 feet of the house structure. And then a whole separate thing is about other structures and the onerous requirement that we do a nutrient allocation analysis of a whole lot for a small structure placed somewhere on an existing lot. Coming up with a much more simple way than we currently have for that, in an effort to make it easier for the public. And then, you know, the other thing that there's another part to this that I haven't even brought up is, what about if somebody comes back every year for another change and another addition to the property? We don't want to create where they can put 10, 12, 14 sheds in a row on a lot that's a small lot, an expansive lot that's basically a farm structure. And I'm not trying to personalize it, but I did personalize it with my experience with my compressor. I know that you have a farm operation on a very large lot, a good sized lot. How do we make for reasonable use of a lot like that? Yeah, well, I think we should do that. But how do we do it without taking it away from a neighbor who has rights to, I feel, a reasonable setback of a structure from their lot? So right now, 1 or 2 structures added to any of the lots in town I'm in favor of if we can reduce the overhead of getting those in place. As far as other more expansive uses of property, that's a whole separate consideration from my perspective. You
So,
know,
Rick, may I ask you a question about this?
sure,
So again, this is, zoning is all about sort of gaming out these scenarios, just as someone is unlikely to put, 75 individual small sheds, in a line, but there are other ways to game this. So if you, let's say, you are able to do, minor expansions around the immediate footprint of the primary residence, right? Up to, let's say, 5 or 10 feet. So would that include let's say a 10-foot porch or deck off the back?
no,
Okay,
this would be for the appendages that we are now
Okay.
ridiculously requiring a zoning permit.
okay, so we would have to, because the worry would be that someone does a 10-foot bump out and then another 10-foot bump out and then another 10-foot bump out.
No, not bumping out structures. I'm not talking about expanding a structure. I'm
Okay.
talking about accessories to the structure being added, a compressor, a propane tank, a generator, things like that.
Okay, a bay
To make
window.
those Dead simple and well-defined, that they don't need to
Okay.
go through a formal zoning permitting process. I think we can define those really well. And if we put our heads together, we can come up with a very expansive list that covers whatever those might be. But the idea of expanding a structure in any way whatsoever, then there's a zoning review. You're creating a new permanent
As
building
and a building permit.
and a building permit required for that.
Well, building permits are needed for everything except for a shed of under 200 square feet. But anything that is going on the principal structure, like a new window needs a building permit, like anything, if it's part of the principal structure. So the thing that, that answers my question, Rick. So if you would
We
want
have a
to,
clear idea of what we don't want to
right,
make people miserable over. And it's those accessories to the structure, the primary structure, well, I don't want to limit my comment to residential structures.
Mhm.
But adding, mechanical equipment and things like that. And I don't know that we need to, I've had some discussions privately with other members one-on-one about, generators that are put near a lot line that interfere with the peace and quiet of a neighbor. I don't know that we can address those in such a definitive way. It would be much nicer if everybody who put a generator, instead of putting it in a narrow side yard around the lake, they put it in a rear yard on the street side. But how much do we want to regulate it? I think what we can do is improve the process for most reasonable people as of right now, and just make it simple to put mechanical equipment on their sites, their tanks, propane tanks, 250 gallons or above would be highly regulated, below not. Could somebody put 1,120 gallon tanks in the rear of their house or on the side of their house and create a really ugly mess? Yes, but how far do we want to go with it? But I think we know what we want to make real easy. And I'd like it to make it easier for sheds and other structures like pergolas and gazebos. A hot tub placed out in back of a house, make it very simple there. And I'd love to relax the need for nutrient allocation analysis for, a patio of some sort, if you could provide compensatory storage immediately adjacent to it. But I'm not even asking to bring that up right now. Just how can we get out of people's hair if we don't need to be there? It's really what I'm trying to get, but there's certain times we really do need to be involved in that process.
okay. So I think there's some rewrites, but I would defer to the commission and maybe the regulations committee on how you would like to proceed with that, because it seems like you have some members that would like to put the issue to the public, or others want to rewrite first. So I'm going to take your consensus lead once I hear a consensus.
John, we can't put it to the public though, right, as written, if there's
That's not
not
how the
consensus,
process-
or?
no, because-
Well, I mean, Justin, the answer is you could, but you would need a majority vote to
Yeah,
send
no.
this version to public hearing.
Yeah, I get it. So would you guys be okay with working through some additional changes for the subcommittee, I think that would be the most appropriate.
What I would suggest, I think the appurtenance, the transformers, the yard, you know, the electrical meters, the AC condensers, all those things are pretty straightforward, and give it a 10-foot buffer or whatever around the existing structure. I think the issue that I have is with accessory structures such as sheds, gazebos, arbors, pergolas, whatever you want to call them. So I think if we can come up with a number and reduce the side yard and rear yard setbacks for those types of things, I would agree with that. I don't think it should be on the property line. Nothing in the front yard. Limit the number of structures. Enlarge the shed size to say 10 by 20. And then have some kind of tracking method for such activity. So it doesn't have to be a full-blown review, it's just somebody wants to fills out a form and putting a shed on my property, that's it.
And I would want to stick religiously to, in the lake, overlay zones to providing compensatory storage for the nutrient allocation. We have a nutrient allocation, analysis and process in place that's worked wonderfully to help preserve the lake quality, and deviating from that for those sheds, I just very protective of the lake watershed, very protective. We've created a near miracle in Columbia by not needing sewers where almost every other town is.
The Lake Management Advisory Commission changed their regulations and allows 100 square foot coverage of something like a patio or whatever, without providing a nutrient allocation plan. That's 100 square.
Is that your concern, Rick? Because we added that to this, the 100 square foot.
No,
not
that this section, if you can see it on the TV, the third paragraph that's shown in the Columbia Lake protection, that is in the current regulations. We did not add that.
Yeah, that's
Is this an all or nothing, Justin? Because you're trying to line up the permit, the building permit, the health department permit, and the zoning permit to all have the same limitations? Or is there something that we could meet somewhere in the middle, some reduction rather than
You mean for me?
yeah.
Here, it's a difference in philosophy, guys. Here's the way that I look at it. If we do a 10-foot setback, well, why is that any better than an 8-foot setback? Or why is it any better than a 5-foot setback? I think a lot of this stuff is arbitrary. The second thing is.
But it's the zero setback. It's the zero.
I understand that.
And if me, that's what troubles me, because there's no safety now.
If it's a 0 set, then how about a 1-foot setback?
No.
Why not?
The
Why?
reason there are setbacks is to protect property owners.
Yeah, but
Okay.
is that.
Protects property values.
What? Property values?
Yes.
Is that our mandate?
That's one of the.
Of course it is.
Do we want to protect high property values or low property?
Require every property value
Okay.
across the board. Okay,
So,
putting sheds up on a property line is gonna reduce the value of the adjacent piece of property.
it will for sure.
I think so. I
No,
wouldn't
wait,
buy a
whoa,
house,
whoa, whoa, whoa.
I wouldn't buy a house
Do we-
with a shed on the property line, my neighbor's shed on the
Okay.
property line,
Okay.
Or 10 of them.
or 10 of them.
Or 10, I wouldn't put 10 either, probably.
It might be run-in sheds, might be for sheep or goats or horses.
I mean, there are reasons for setbacks.
Oh, I don't, that's the reasons for setbacks, and what I'm trying to do is find out.
This is not an urban situation where we're doing, rows of townhouses and all kinds of things.
There can be a rural situation where setbacks don't necessarily matter either. There's a variety, listen, here's my philosophy, and everyone can disagree with me or not, all right? What we're telling people now is that we're giving them a standard of 200 square feet for a building permit for a structure. But because of setbacks, we're telling them you cannot do anything within that 25-foot perimeter of your property, regardless of where it is, regardless of the size, regardless of how far it is, whether it's 20 feet from your neighbor or 2,000 feet from your neighbor, okay? I still have to pay my property taxes within that 25 feet. I've got to pay my mortgage within that 25 feet. This is where my inner libertarian comes out, okay? I either own my property up to the property line. I cannot trespass on your property. I can't. Because you can take legal action against me. But what you're telling me is I can't encroach beyond 25 feet towards that property line. And to me, that's arbitrary, and I understand people disagree with that. That's my philosophy. I want to allow people to do reasonable things up until the point my property ends at the property line. Your property ends at your property line. Sometimes the town doesn't have a good solution for everybody, and you and I need to work it out. And we're trying to prevent problems that may or may not occur, and some of them, frankly, are pretty unlikely to occur. That's my philosophy. I don't mean to sound frustrated, but that's where I'm at. I know I'm.
Justin, what you just said, the purpose of zoning regulations were created in concept were because by having zoning regulations, there is, and maybe the correct legal term is no longer character, but there is an essence to a community that can be changed dramatically by, in a positive way, by having reasonable space between buildings, especially in a country setting, and make for a peaceful existence between neighbors when there's reasonable space between buildings and structures, and the chance for there's an atmosphere in a rural town like this that we're trying to protect. We try to protect the character and look of our community. It's not pure aesthetics, it's about harmony. We have having reasonable space for property owners, and the numbers that you just cited, actually they're a little bit different. So we have 25-foot side yard setbacks on conforming lots. For rear lots, we have a different side yard setback that's greater than that because there's greater bulk there. On non-conforming lots, we allow reductions down to 15 feet on side yard setbacks based on changes to our regulations that formally require the special permit. We allow reductions to 12.5 feet side yard setbacks for sheds not over 120 square feet. And we keep that relatively simple. So it isn't that, and those weren't arbitrary numbers, that I think they were picked, the side yard setbacks were picked based on typical building heights and geometric relationship to building heights to setback from side yards and possibly other buildings. And they're somewhat arbitrary, but they've been based on a long-term perspective based on convention. And they've proven to be very successful. And we do have some exceptions to those setbacks, and mostly people are less than happy when they're less than that. And we did reduce our setbacks dramatically over the years, especially for non-conforming lots, in response to requests from people in the lake zone. They said, look, I don't need to be 25 feet from the side yard, and I don't care if my neighbor's 25 feet. If you let them reduce it to 15 and I can go 15, I'm okay with that.
Increase the lot coverage, sure.
Yeah, we increase lot coverage. You can do increased lot coverage on small non-conforming lots, all limited by the science of septic technology, And so we've come to a really good place with it. We come with a lot of good solutions. I think relaxing the regulations a little bit at a time and seeing where it unfolds is a prudent way to approach it. I think expanding the shed regulation to allow for slightly larger sheds than what we do with those reduced setbacks, either half of the standard setback or 15 feet, whatever part of the regulation you can choose that applies. Whether you have 15 feet, you can technically go to 15 feet on a 12 by 24 garage if it fits into the format for the reduced setbacks for your size lot.
Reduce height.
Reduce height.
Well, let's work through some adjustments within the subject.
John, I think where we're aiming with this is, I think we're really clear on the appendages to a primary structure, and I can call them appendages. I don't mean they're attached to, but and maybe 10 foot is a wider arc around a structure than we need to allow. We basically want generators, propane tanks, to be able to be located without a lot of fanfare. Those, bottle tanks that are right up against the house. So maybe 6 feet is a reasonable number, maybe 7, 8. We'd look for guidance from you on that. I think I would hope that we're in near consensus about having some way of expanding the shed regulation, but sticking with the same general concept, but not making a requirement for nutrient allocation analysis either on those sheds, but maybe a compensatory analysis on the shed site itself. And, you know, and that can be a simple leaflet that we create in the building department says, this is how you build a shed. If you want to put a shed up, this is how you do it.
Mhm.
You can go up to 200 square feet for one shed. Maybe we want to vote to expand it to 2 sheds or 2 other structures up to X square feet. Maybe the first one can be this size, the second one this size, but come up with a simple how-to structure. If you're going to add propane tanks, a compressor for a ductless air conditioner, a ducted air conditioning compressor, a generator. This is how you do it, and this is what the rules that apply to it are. And so if there's a lot of confusion about that, I think we can make the process very simple with an instruction sheet. This is what you have to do, this is what has to be reviewed, and it isn't a formalized zoning permit, it's a.
Okay, I think I see where you're headed with this. I'll,
It just seems simple.
Yeah. And I think if Justin going at the shed regulation in an incremental way is probably the best way to proceed. And if we go to a public hearing and everybody shows up and says, we don't, you know, if everyone has the perspective like you have, then we have to listen to that
And we come back and we modify.
and come back and
Yeah.
go for another try.
It's fine.
And maybe relax them slightly, but take a mandate and encourage people to say what they think, you know, what do you think? What do you want from us? What can we do to serve you?
What works for you?
Yeah,
I'll work with John and we'll make some adjustments to that.
that sounds good.
okay.
So if you want, we can try and do an off-cycle, meeting of the subcommittee maybe. So we don't,
Before our next meet, or,
because we're losing like weeks lately.
Yeah, yeah,
I want to try and do something in between.
yeah, we probably should. I'll get you guys.
John, what did we covered for minor modifications under 8.2?
Sorry, I can bring that back up on the screen. So this was
No, are we all set there?
for minor modifications?
No, I'm good.
51.7.
Yeah, no, I don't think, I don't need to revisit, anyone wanna revisit that? Okay. Site plan versus special permit uses in CM districts.
Well, so I'm sorry, are we all set with talking about minor modifications?
I think,
We went over that in depth last meeting. I think we came to the general agreement that that was okay. unless
yeah, I think the way it's presented is
Okay,
acceptable.
okay. Great.
I won't even say acceptable.
Then you breezed over the permitted uses versus.
Yeah, because we went through that list last meeting as well, so,
And I have- Yeah, I've yet to, I need to convert that to, I think when we're ready to start talking about a public hearing, I need to convert that to an actual formal markup version, so you see what's being moved. But we did go through all of the current special exception categories in the commercial district and you know, made some recommended changes about which, so a couple to eliminate, for instance, you know, state or federal government uses, post offices, certain things like that, that we don't necessarily have regulation over. Some to consolidate, like I think restaurants and clubs we could consolidate, and then others to move from special permit to site plan.
Yes.
And then the fourth category was things that would be site plan unless it was abutting an existing residential use,
Use.
which would then become which would then be triggered to a special permit. So I think we have consensus on all those. I just need to convert that
Okay.
to a formal markup to bring it to public hearing.
Okay. And then family home daycare,
is, I've lost my mouse here. The family home daycare, this is the state statute changed so that we need to basically allow registered group childcare homes and home daycare. It needs to be as of right in residential areas.
so we're all set with that.
Well,
For what-
we will have to go to public hearing on it, but yes,
Yeah,
that'll be.
we're all set on our perspective on.
Oh, right, yeah. Well, the perspective is you have no choice.
So are you gonna write a proposed regulation?
Yes.
Okay.
But we'll need to review that before the public hearing, correct?
Yeah, if you want, I can give you a proposed, we can basically, for the next meeting, I can give you a regulation that would be ready to go to public hearing.
You know, by our next meeting, we may be ready to pull the trigger and say, let's go to public hearing on all these. Let's be a little bit optimistic and say maybe we can get to that point.
Okay.
Okay, and if not, talk to me, we'll communicate. If that's overly ambitious, tell me.
Yeah, I think we're okay.
Okay, under 8.5, the planned neighborhood housing. So Justin and I discussed this recently, and I had some questions in what was put out. I have the line version that you sent us and reviewed that pretty carefully. And have more questions than it's really well thought out. I like a lot the changes you made. Justin, do you want to speak to this?
No, why don't you go ahead?
Okay, so this has for the lined out edition version of starting with 52.7.19 that we had a lined out edition in our packet. I had printed one out, so I'm going from my printed version
I can put this on the screen also if people want to.
packet. Okay, so we have this in our packet.
This one
Yes,
was red.
Yeah.
yeah,
It's-
mine is
yeah.
printed in black and white.
And it has the handwritten Guzkowski markup at the top.
1 to 23.
Pardon?
That's John's name on the top. Good mark.
Yeah.
Okay. That's me last meeting. No, I've got it. I, so going through on the first paragraph. I think it's important to state the intent off record or on the record, but off of the document. Justin and I reviewed 52.7.19.1. What we're trying, just state that clearly what we're trying to do is expand the ability to be flexible with developing housing and attempt to have a more broad development reach for affordable housing. In essence. So by going from calling this retirement housing and removing in our regulation, the age restriction in our regulation, we're saying, we would want to say to the public, this will become a developer selected thing. Under the state statutes, they could pick to do age restricted housing. That would be a developer option, but they can, under the same regulations that they previously could only do age restricted housing for over 55. Now they can do non-age addressed housing. And that's a positive thing. It increases potentially the pool of potential housing available to the public. So that's nothing specific in that part. The way it's written, the way you've modified it makes a lot of sense. I'm gonna skip down to 19.3. Had concerns about using the term, and it may come from prior parts of the regulation. On that first paragraph, a building or group of buildings located on a single parcel of land or multiple contiguous parcels sharing common management and ownership and consisting of single dwelling units. So I'm confused a little bit by it because a common ownership interest, I'm assuming these could be condos or they could be apartments being developed.
This nails it. This says it's apartments.
No,
That's,
No, it says consisting of single dwelling units.
but it says single ownership.
Right, so the property is owned by, you know, Miracle Homes LLC. That's the homeowners association. And that, so that could be a
Excuse me.
condo,
Excuse me, yeah, it could be a condo, right, John?
right,
Shared common ownership is a condo, basically.
exactly. It's a common
I
interest
was
community.
concerned that this verbiage would preclude condos because it would imply just apartments.
No,
Nope.
shared common ownership.
Sharing common management and ownership.
And
So that's a common interest community or a single owner.
Okay, as long as it's really clear.
And the one thing that this would preclude, and as I'm just looking at this now, is consisting of single dwelling units. What this would preclude is a multiple unit apartment or townhouse structure. These would be detached or semi-detached. Which is, you know, that's a design choice, but this would preclude a multi-story, you know, garden style apartment type thing, because those would not be single dwelling units.
Okay.
But that's, and that's, again, this is, obviously this is modified off of your neighborhood retirement housing. That's a design choice that we'd have to talk about.
Yeah. I see. All right. So that's a discussion that we can have. Certainly eliminating a lot of the restrictions on this and converting it from retirement to the planned neighborhood housing is a positive thing. I did have a concern that the exact verbiage wouldn't get us to where we wanted to be.
excuse me, can we back up a minute, John? You said that you didn't think single dwelling units would allow multiple stories of units?
No, multiple, like I think if you think of it like a multi-story apartment building, that way you would have multiple units in a single structure. I think this
Yes.
would preclude that. This is basically like a condo complex of, you know, say small bungalows that are all detached or semi-detached.
So it does not allow townhouse type structure?
Yeah, and I think we'd have to clear that up. You know, could it
Because I think-
allow, you know, a two by, you know, a side by side bungalow duplex? Maybe, maybe not. Would it allow, you know, a multi-story, like a 3-story with flats? Probably not. We'd have to sort of tease out what we actually want.
Then
But
should this be changed? Should the single dwelling unit be changed, or should you?
Yeah, that's kind of my question is, I mean, the current regulation allows basically just single detached.
Expensive.
Do we want to, yeah, do we want to be a little bit more expansive with the design choices? Like,
Two-story flats or 3-story flats, something like that.
yeah, so I mean, or so if you wanted, you know, like even a small-ish structure that looks like a large farmhouse that actually has 4 units in it, is that okay?
Yes.
Yes.
So, all right, so we would want to adjust that wording. Okay,
I think if you're trying to encourage development, that's the thing that's going to make it
Yes.
work, as opposed to a bunch of individually placed units.
right. So yeah, that's, and I'll acknowledge that when I was doing a markup here, I missed that reference to single dwelling units. So we'll want to adjust it.
Because you 8 or 10 units per acre.
Well, that's the other thing you gotta cover.
Yeah, well, we're gonna get there. Okay. So going through this to the next page. I just had a question under item 6, where it says architectural plans showing accurate elevations. On the next line, it says construction materials and other massing, architectural. What do you mean by massing?
I don't turn that around. What do you mean by massing? Because this is in your current regulation.
Yeah, well, I have no idea what that means.
I think it has to do with, you know, the size and scale of the building relative to the bulk. Yeah, the bulk. How tall it is, what the facades are relative to surrounding structures. I mean, it's a,
Well,
yeah.
I wouldn't have felt that I was certain I knew what that meant. I'm gonna go to the next page. And complex size and location under 19.5. Going to paragraph A.
Mhm.
Where did we come up with 4 acres as opposed to, I know where we came up with 10 acres when we came up with the original retirement regulations. Where did you come up with 4? It seems like a prudent number, but I'd love to be able to justify that 4 acres as a number from a scientific standpoint.
The answer is it's not terribly scientific. Other than in developments of some, enough of a critical mass of units that it would actually make sense to develop a property as a multifamily type thing, as opposed to just a single family dwelling. I wanted to make it larger than at least twice the minimum lot size for a single family. So you had some room for, parking and circulation and multiple units. So because I've seen a lot of developments of that size, but exactly 4, it's not an exact science. Any more than I think 10 is an exact science. It's a place to start.
Because then we'd be looking at it and saying, you can't build a house, a single family house, but you could build 4. Or you could build.
That may
8.
be the case. I was also gonna say,
Right.
do you feel a need, if we were going to adopt these, how would people feel if, large multifamily complex was built in the middle of their residential neighborhood? And do we need some sort of additional buffer, or should it be in only certain areas that we would allow it? But I'm not even asking to address that in detail now. I want to go over to the 3rd line there, and a minimum frontage of 50 feet. Is that because that's the minimum you would need for a road to go in?
Yeah, yes, and that's in your current regulation. But yes, that's the reason for that.
Road thing.
So I wonder where the 50, I'm looking at this in the context of affordable housing now, not in the context of retirement housing. I think we need to take a hard look at whether all this is a balance of all these various factors. 4 acres minimum in a residential district. There's some residential lots, plenty of them that are 4, 5, and 6 acres. What if you could take and convert a house in a whole bunch in an area where it's all single family detached houses, and all of a sudden there's 8 dwelling units next door to your single family house? Will that make you happy?
Now would be limited.
Yeah.
It's always been the case.
And it will probably be conversions of existing single family structures and build-ons where this occurs, because they're the ones that have been placed on all the good land in town with the higher potential
But a
density.
16-bedroom septic system.
Yeah,
I mean,
probably not on any of the available land. Going back down to item B, where does 8 units per acre come from? And 12 units, if 20% of the units are affordable? And are we setting a number there that is so far outside of what septic technology will allow that it's not even, maybe lower numbers are more appropriate?
No,
it's
so-
about having enough that we'd actually use it.
This is, again, so what I'm trying to do here is sort of strike a balance. And again, I highlighted this, and hopefully it's highlighted in your version as well, for the express reason of calling out that this is a starting point. I'm throwing a number on the table. But the purpose being to try to strike a balance between not making it so restrictive that if you had a 10-acre parcel and the allowable density of something like this is so low that it's 1 or 2 acres per, or 1 or 2 units per acre, that there is no incentive for a developer to create new housing opportunities, but at the high end, not creating such high density that it would completely disrupt the relatively low density pacing of the neighborhood. So I tried to come up with something, and this may be too high. We will see when we talk about it. But
Yeah,
from a septic standpoint, that's not beyond, if you have reasonable soils, that's not beyond the capacity. I will tell you, in Essex, I worked on, as staff, a multifamily. It was an 830G affordable, but it was 52 units on less than 3 acres. We're talking 18 units per acre, give or take, on septic system. So that's not beyond septic technology. It's really depends on your soils and conditions. And again, the limiting factor here is public health code. So yeah, but these numbers are meant to try to strike a balance or start the discussion of striking a balance between encouraging density that would allow developers to see some value and encourage them to actually build something, but not too dense that it would be incredibly disruptive. But so those numbers, that's a starting point.
Not fantasy numbers.
No.
They're not fantasy numbers.
Okay, I wasn't aware of that. It's very informative. Interest. Causing a lot of thought here. Also about building height, going to the next page under item D. Maximum height of 28 feet of 1 story and 35 feet of 2 story. This kind of begs a discussion about not just this area of the regulation, but our height regulations in general. And I brought this up and I had a personal interest in it. So if there's a conflict, I would recuse myself. But I had a local builder who's all done building in town now, who was begging for a 40-foot height allowance for single family homes. Because with a 28-foot deep house with a 12 pitch roof and a walkout basement, you couldn't do 12 pitch roofs, which they love to do because it's great for snow shedding. Maybe these are not high enough allowances, and maybe they're plenty high if it's in a neighborhood of other similar height structures, but if there's enough of a setback, I'm throwing a question out saying, I don't know if those are the 35-foot limitation is maybe too restrictive.
John, you and I talked about that. Wasn't that somewhat arbitrary? Didn't we have a discussion on that?
Yeah, I mean, 35 feet is, I think my suspicion is that's the height because that's the standard height you see in most residential zoning regulations in most towns in Connecticut. That's, I don't necessarily have any kind of good reason for it. The public health and safety reason is maybe it's just standard firefighting equipment, or buildings without sprinklers. But I don't have a good reason why it shouldn't be 30. I don't have a good reason why it shouldn't be 40.
Okay, I'd like to have a discussion later on that in more depth. And then going to the next page, I was a little bit confused going to item Q under the percentage of land preserved. Saying 15%, but in another part of the regulation, I thought I saw 20%.
Okay, that's a good question. This is in your current zoning regulation. Let's see. It's 20% is right there is about slopes. I'm just looking for references to 20%.
Okay.
Dwelling units, dedicated open space. No, that's definitions.
Reference to unbuildable space elsewhere in the regulation, and that's not what I was talking about. And I'm sorry, I didn't make note of where else I might have seen that. Maybe it was just that reference.
Yeah, I'm not seeing a disconnect there, but I'll look.
I just want to make sure that we're very consistent with percentages as we go through the regulations. And then,
Well, if there's no need for two notations, take one out.
that's the other part
So
of
there's
it.
no discrepancy.
And no other comments on it. I think that the changes that you proposed in general are exactly in harmony with what we had indicated when we discussed this. So the whole idea here is what was supposed to create affordable housing at Whitford Village. By refining that concept in a bit and taking away the age restriction, maybe we can come up with similar higher density developments for all people. And then with the bonus incentive for the 20% affordable housing, maybe that's a step in a more positive direction. It just breaks my heart at what it costs to create a residential structure. We have limited things that we can do. This is one way of approaching it that will do nothing but hopefully help make it more affordable.
And again, the idea being that this would be added as a special permit category so that the commission would have the ability to make sure that, you know, there are landscape regulations in there, there are buffering requirements, just so to make sure that, you know, if you've got a neighborhood of 5 or 6 acre houses, acre lots with single family houses, that, you know, here comes the next one and you have 8, 10, 12 houses on it. Will it fit, you know, from a landscape and impact standpoint?
I don't want to surprise the public on this. I want to get a lot of input even before we go to a public hearing.
Yeah.
I
And
really,
right.
if there's any way we can publicize it through the other agencies that are very interested in affordable housing in town, I would want the concepts to be out there. We need to build, if we want to approach this and make this possible, it can only occur with public support. You know, there's got to be broad public support for it, and no, people can't feel that they were blindsided by a proposal being thrown out by us.
So I think, you know, again, this is the first time you guys are seeing this. This was an initiative that came out of discussions with Justin, with town manager Walter, with the first selectman, and in response to conversations that we'd had with the Council on Aging and the Code, which is a Council on Equity and Diversity. So everyone, you know, there's been a lot of conversations that led to this impetus, but this is the first time we're looking at the regulations. I don't, yeah.
Start. It's a really, really good start. I applaud it. I think we have to be aware of all the political considerations.
Sure.
Each step of the process and try and address them preemptively, if possible. Not to preempt anyone, but just anticipate what public reaction is going to be and try and address it before we even formalize bringing this to a potential votable regulation.
So I mean, if this is at least in something of a format you feel comfortable with sharing, I could certainly work with the town manager and circulate this to those stakeholder groups.
Yeah, I take I would do a finished looking version of it, not the
Right.
line out version.
Right. So there is a clean version after in your packets. There is also a clean version.
Yes. So yeah, I looked at the clean version. I think it's a really good start on this. It shows that we really want to do something about this.
That's fine. So I'll throw a draft watermark over the clean version, and we can share it with the stakeholders.
And maybe even make sure it's on the website as a downloadable item, as a work in progress, looking for any feedback from the public on it.
I can work with you, John, on that. I'll plan on attending council on.
Does everyone agree with that approach to this? It's gonna be a shock to some people, and there's gonna be a lot of people that object to seeing, you know, 6 dwelling units next door to their single family home. And maybe there's ways to address those concerns in a way that I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, and I think this is a potentially significant change, you know, I would say step forward in your regulations, but I think if you're going to proceed with this commission needs to be on board and comfortable with this direction it's setting, because there will be the first application, you will have upset neighbors. And obviously this commission has dealt with that before, but it's, you know, I think it's important being as comfortable with the purpose behind this, and recognizing that, you know, the people in the lake area live at these densities all the time in more or less harmonious fashion, right? that might introduce, densities that are previously unseen in other areas, but it doesn't mean that, the quality of residential existence needs to jump off a cliff in these areas, so it's, the commission has to be comfortable with those trade-offs.
Probably would want to share the same public hearing if this was side yard.
You
I
could-
can make all kinds of
you could-
comments, but I'm not gonna wall, don't worry,
Okay.
we'll talk about it
It's
for years.
John, this was a really good, what you did was really, thank you.
Good.
Anything else, any other feedback from commission on this?
No, I think we fixed a lot
Okay.
more work, a lot more reviewing.
Okay, I'm gonna move on to item 9, the zoning officer report. We do have a zoning officer report. I didn't have the opportunity to reach out to our zoning officer and discuss. Potentially next meeting, like see if Connie could visit with us, and if not, that meeting, the meeting after. And I didn't have time to analyze what's on this page. Any thoughts about what's here, or?
Yeah, I had a couple, one, I really want to thank Connie tremendously for putting dates in here. I think the previous one was missing a lot of the dates, so we didn't really know if she had re-inspected a year ago or this year or whatever, so I think most of it's been updated, which is really good. The only two things that I was worried about was item 13 and 14, which it's on hold because of potential zoning regulation changes.
Which numbers, I'm sorry?
13 and 14. If you look over to the right, it says conflict,
Yes.
proposed regular changes, hold. So I guess that's what we've been talking about tonight. So he's not gonna take any action until we resolve those.
She's not, I just did discuss that with Connie. And I said, what basis do you decide not to press on some issues and not on others? She said, well, where I think that there may be the potential for a zoning regulation change and resolve something, I just relax and wait to see what happens.
Yeah, it's fine.
But I haven't really had an in-depth conversation with her about this, and
No, I think it's probably a prudent thing to do. I mean, if the regulations change and then those things come off the list, then they come off the list. If the regulations don't change to their advantage, then she's gotta go back after.
okay.
Yeah.
So I plan to go through this. Would it be prudent to ask her to sit in on our next meeting? Any need?
If we're gonna go over the report.
Yeah, she probably should.
Okay,
I mean, really, the only things we're gonna go over are the open enforcement, maybe working with the violator, and then if there's any legal action pending, right? I mean, the
Yeah.
closed items are in the middle here, and we're not gonna talk about those.
Right.
yeah, and if there's something that you're aware of or you want pursued, you need to individually file a formal complaint with the office and do it as an individual. That's the process, and
I think having the closed items on here is important, because we can notice some trends maybe with the issues.
Mhm. Okay. I'll ask her to attend our next meeting. And we can, whatever you want to discuss, I'll put her on, John, can we put her on the agenda for the start of the meeting, if possible, right after, as an early item, so she can get into the meeting and out?
Of course.
Okay,
As I say, of course, I'm looking at Mary Kay to do that. Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah.
All right. I'm gonna make a motion, let's see, there was correspondence from Andover and Hebron, and we probably don't need to review that.
Yeah, no, and I just wanted to circle back with you on this. I know it's been sort of tradition that goes in there. Those referrals, which are just text amendments, the statute requiring those to be referred to abutting towns changed many years ago. And a lot of towns just by a matter of course send it to abutting communities. even though they're not required to. If you're doing a text change, you just need to send it to the COG, the Regional Planning Agency. So there is no need to refer to these at all. And if you would like, and it would be my preference, to just not include them in the correspondence unless you want to see what other towns are doing. But there is no need to respond.
If you read them and if you think they're pertinent,
Okay.
let us see them, and if not, I rely on your judgment.
That's, yeah, and I mean, and in the state statutes changed to basically request that the COG act as advocate for abutting communities. But yeah, if it's something very controversial, like, Andover is throwing its large industrial zone right on the, Columbia line, well, sure. But yeah, anyway, so I just wanted to point that out, that it's actually not a statutory referral.
It's interesting to see them. We don't usually see them. Next item is open discussion. Anything, anyone? Okay, audience of citizens. Audience of citizens executive session?
Is that two separate things?
No.
Mr.
Well,
Mr. McGaldy has his hand up.
Mr. McGauley, sure, go ahead.
Okay, so Michael McGaldy, 33 Garland Road. So I just I'm a little confused. I was looking at the meeting minutes from the last meeting that talked about section 51.7 minor modifications of approved special permits. And the last notation under that section says discussion of the topic will continue at the next PZC meeting. But yet tonight, it didn't seem like it was discussed. I think what I heard was it had been talked about in the last meeting, but I'm a little confused because the minutes seem to reflect that it was going to be talked about, additionally.
I don't have an explanation for you other than we've all glanced at that and didn't feel a need for further discussion.
Okay. So I just want to verify, before this would go through, I think you had indicated that this would go to a public hearing. Is that correct?
The process in place is that when we propose a regulation change,
Yep.
that we go to a public hearing, we notice it to the public. And just for the record, we're required to follow our own rules. So in this case, whatever regulations are there, we have to follow them. And so any changes have to be well documented and give the public a chance to comment on them.
Okay. Yeah, because I would, I'd be really interested to know what the criteria are for how you determine, I see that somebody applies or brings it forward to the town planner or to the committee, but I didn't see anything that really outlined defining what would constitute a minor modification, versus something that would be considered not minor, or, any even like examples of what fall under those. For example, increasing the number of events or increasing the frequency of something, or the size of something. When I think of some of the things that fall.
It sounds like what you're alluding to is the wedding venue thing.
Well, that's just one example, but
No, it's a
again,
specific question, there's a statutory limitation as to the number of events. So we don't have the ability to approve a change to a site plan approval if it's in place that goes beyond what the statute allows. So I don't know that we can answer your question this evening. We'll take it under advisement and discuss it. But yeah, as far as all of this goes, yeah.
If I might, Mr. Chair?
I don't feel we felt a need for further discussion on that proposed regulation change.
So if I might, Mr. Chair? And I don't know if Mr. McGaldy can see the screen or not.
yes.
This was the regulation that was proposed and discussed as a workshop item. To your question, what's the criteria is in the definition here, that provided such changes shall in no way affect the overall layout, design, development density, environmental impact, or nature of the site plan or special permit. That would be the criteria that the commission would decide upon if this regulation were to pass.
Right. Although I do believe we've had similar discussions around things like environmental impact and impacts on communities. And I don't think there's always been a consensus
Well,
between
that's why
some
you
of
have a
us.
vote. That's why you have a
So-
vote.
So I'm not sure, have we answered your question, Mr. McGaldy?
Not really. Again, I don't think it really gets,
Totally clear what your question was. Maybe if you could articulate it in a more exact
it's,
way.
so it's not clear to me how you make a decision and what you would consider to be minor modifications. I understand you have a process in place. I understand that somebody would apply. Then I also understand that you, as a group, would make a decision about whether or not it was minor. And I'm wondering what standards you're applying when making that decision. I've heard things brought up like scientific methodologies before, and I'm just curious, you know, how you come to decisions about what would be minor versus not. And do you have any types of standards that you're looking to apply when people make those requests? And so that's my question.
Okay, I think we'll take your question under advisement and see if we can maybe give you a more refined perspective on your question. You may not be able to get an answer. You know, it becomes very clear to us what are very minor, minor changes to site plans, and we're trying to help people utilize their property and make minor changes on an ongoing basis. But to pin us into a corner, I don't know that that's something that we could answer on the fly right now. You know, we'll take that under advisement, your question. Appreciate the question, though.
Sure. And it's certainly not an effort to make you feel
We're
in
gonna
a
move
corner.
on from
It's
this.
it's
We're gonna
just
move
to have a
on from
better
this.
understanding.
We're gonna move on from this. Okay. So there's nothing that we want to discuss under executive session. So
I'm sorry, you have another hand raised for public comment?
Oh, Rhonda, I'm sorry.
That's okay. It's late. I'll make it short, but as a member of Coalition on Diversity and Equity, I just wanted to thank you for the work you're doing to try to make affordable housing more possible and desirable for a developer to come in. And we'll take a look at the document. And I think there's some of the questions that you and others raised tonight that we have some questions too, in terms of, how many acres should it really be and things like that. And we'll take a look and definitely get you feedback. But you've clearly, the committee, the Reg Review Committee, and you all and John have done a lot of work, and we really appreciate it.
Any comments are going to be helpful. Any input we'll absorb like a sponge. And it's just heartbreaking what it costs to build a new living structure. And then whatever we can do on the local level, I think we're all committed to doing it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm gonna make a motion, we adjourn. All those in favor? Would be unanimous. Thank you. So we offline.
Yes.
Was I